Welcome back to the final session of our groundbreaking CyberSmart.Live event. I'm joined by CEO and co-founder of CyberSmart, Jamie Akhtar, for a quick 10-minute catch-up about the key takeaways from today's session, as well as to unpack any action points from here on out. So Jamie, welcome back to the stage.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So just before we kick off this, because of course we've kind of compiled some questions from the chat function, which folks, it was really helpful that you could send those through. I just want to ask you, what was a big kind of highlight or takeaway? What stood out to you from today's event?
I love the fact everyone's united on trying to solve this problem. Like, it's a really difficult challenge trying to essentially change the hearts and minds of millions of businesses in this country and beyond. And like the fact that we're looking at this from a government perspective, from an academic perspective, from insurance, from security, from IT,
Yeah.
and really thinking about how the ecosystem fits together. I think it's really great to see that.
Yeah, in practice. And,
Yeah.
you know, we were talking in the panel earlier about this multidisciplinary approach that's needed, hard to pronounce, but very necessary. And I think this kind of really pays testament to that, about all the factors that feature in. So just jumping into these questions that kindly were sent on from the chat. I know earlier that you said, bring on the tough ones if you like. So it'd be great to come away with some details on this. Simon asked, first off, I'd just like to have someone that I can refer specialist cybersecurity insurance opportunities to. Could you help or offer any guidance on where to look for that?
Yeah, so I'd definitely say start with the broker we work with already. So Superscript's a really good, helpful resource. Not only do they have their direct team, which can help with smaller policies up to £1 million, but they actually have a brokerage team that will work with the entire market. So they'll work with maybe 50, 60 different insurers to get really good specialist coverage. And that's a really important part of it, like making sure it's right size for the business is key.
Right, and because this sort of follow-up question here was if you provide the insurance or have a partnership that can be joined, but I suppose that kind of touches on that element there.
Indeed, yeah. And I mean, we're going to be running a podcast actually. Should be coming out, and we'll send more information in our next partner newsletter, but specifically on what to look for in cyber insurance. Like, what are the components, what are the attributes? How should you be thinking about cyber insurance? What are typical inclusions and exclusions? What kind of coverage levels do you need? All those kind of questions.
Yeah.
As well as the big question, which is, are you becoming uninsurable? So we're going to address that in a follow-up podcast in more detail.
Ominous, but I'm sure greatly helpful. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing the details on that. Just at a high level, you talked about how you're going to share the details in follow-up content, but Usman here in the chat asked, what would a baseline insurance cover look like for CyberSmart as a one-size-fits-all?
I think really just to give you kind of a sneak preview in terms of what's going to be in there, like you should be looking for, in particular, what that incident response capability looks like. Most likely, that's the thing we heard from James earlier as well in the panel. That's something that you're going to have to lean on when it comes to an incident. It can massively reduce the cost. Often it's not the direct cost of the incident, but it's the fact that the business is being disrupted. Your customers aren't able to access it. There's reputational damage and risk. There's legal. So it's kind of like the more effective that breach response is. So I'd say that's probably one of the most important underlooked aspects in that policy.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of those elements were underlined. I think it was by Akash within the panel that it's not just about the recovery, but it's also about the reputational damage
Indeed,
too.
yeah.
And there's lots of channels of peril here to look at. So thank you for illuminating us on that. Let's just dig into this question here then from Sean. Quite a specific one here. He asks, would using a CyberSmart agent affect Sophos AV with the firewall heartbeat feature, or would it work alongside it? Are you able to offer some clarity?
Yeah, of course. So CyberSmart is designed to work right alongside every other security product already deployed in your stack. So we support all major antivirus vendors, firewalls. So whatever you have deployed, CyberSmart will detect that and demonstrate that you've got that in place as well. A little bit broader than that, and something I noticed in a lot of the questions, there was actually like an audience poll, I'm sure many of you participated in, around RMMs. And that's something that we're definitely going to be taking on board in terms of product feedback. Like adding that integration layer, I think sounded like it's going to be really important to our partners too. So not only with your security tools, but also with your operational tools, your workflow.
Yeah, and how that can be integrated in, because I know you talk about how a big priority for you is to make this simple, make it accessible. I think for lots of folks, perhaps even on the call, but especially in this arena, they might not necessarily feel invited to this conversation or that perhaps it's relevant to them.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, well, great. Just we've got about 4 minutes left together, and I've got a couple more questions to get through. Chiefly, Viviana messaged in the chat, and they asked, should there be more pressure? I suppose it's a bit of a cultural question. Should there be more pressure on vendors or software providers to reduce that risks in their supply chains, and if so, how?
I think so. I think the obligation, the onus is really on every supplier of technology out there. Like we're a software vendor and we take our own security very seriously. I think every other software vendor needs that level of integrity in the software that they're producing. Companies rely on this to store their data, to store their passwords and all kinds of stuff, right, that we need for our day-to-day. And there is a specific requirement, I think, if you're a software vendor. Now, we're starting to see more legislation come through the EU, for example, around like cybersecurity products and what kind of quality standards they need to meet in order to get there. But I think this is something every single software vendor should be considering. Yeah. So I'd agree with that.
And then can I ask, again, perhaps from a leadership standpoint, I'm sure we've got lots of people within our attendance today who are in that role where perhaps their influence is taken very seriously, but they don't know how to perhaps word it or show that value proposition. What would be the approach, therefore, then, to put that pressure within your supply chains? How should you go about it?
I think firstly, you need to set the example. So like by demonstrating that this is your level of quality and security, that's a really good starting point to have that conversation with your supply chain. And I think the second part of it is educating and informing people. Mm-hmm. A lot of third-party suppliers see these extensive questionnaires as checkbox point-in-time exercises as kind of just another hurdle to jump through. And I think what we need to do is actually demystify and break down and say, actually, this is what we're looking to achieve. This is what's important to us. How can we work together to get to that point in play, that point in time?
Yeah. I mean, I'm so interested in this idea of community. I know that in your presentation, you placed a lot of focus on, actually, that's your vision for this space. Yeah. What does good look like when it comes to a CyberSmart community, or indeed just a protection, safety and educational community in this space?
Yeah, I mean, it's very cliche, but knowledge sharing is fundamental. I think working together as managed service providers, IT and security specialists, like being able to share what works, what doesn't work, what we're seeing, how to avoid common threats. I mean, we heard from Alexis around scams. Like, there's the same level of challenge in the cybersecurity world. So it starts with information sharing, but it also there's a big onus on us as a security and an IT community to educate and inform customers and end users about the importance of security, about how every employee within the company has a role and a part to play in terms of making their company more secure. And so I think if you focus on those two aspects, then we can create a pretty solid community.
Yeah, and I suppose there's an element, it's kind of nice to have a therapy session where not just about knowledge sharing about best practices, but also talking about some of the challenges. Yeah, and if you hear that other industry leaders are facing the same thing, great, that's comforting.
Yeah, and for sure, like if you're facing a challenge, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations out there facing the same.
Yeah, and I think today has kind of been a testament to that in helping people see where other people are at. Just with the final then, the minute that we've got left, could I ask you to share with our attendants, perhaps if there's any action points that you want them to take immediately following this event, and or Jamie, if you've got a sort of final lasting message or words of advice that you want to leave our attendants with?
Yeah, I'd definitely say start with your own security first. I think that has to be a fundamental, and I think it's something you should invest in. I think something you should educate yourself in. You don't need to have security specialists sitting within your organization. Like, all of us can get a decent enough understanding. There's a lot of resources out there, and CyberSmart's here to provide you that baseline too. I think that's definitely your first starting point. And I think really the lasting message is that cybercrime and the challenges we faced, as we talked about at the start, are not going away anytime soon. So we really do need collective action, and we need it sustained in order to achieve that kind of change we want to see in the world.
Yeah, I suppose we're unpicking past habits and having to really collaborate and align in order to move forward on this journey, which is quite a new place for lots of us in this space. Jamie, it's been so great to pick your brains, and it's been really just such an honour to host such a jam-packed event. Thank you for being with us, and thanks for using the platform to share your expertise.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Folks, what a way to close out the day with CEO and co-founder of CyberSmart, Jamie Akhtar, from, like he says, the psychology of scammers to the government's new regulatory proposals, from the state of cyber insurance to the latest and greatest innovations on the market. We have covered it all and so much more, but I'd love actually to know what you think. So on that, I'll launch our final poll of the day, and again, this is just for us to gain a bit of insight so that we can keep making the best of our time together. So that poll is open. We'll leave that running. In the meantime, I just want to thank our wonderful lineup of speakers. And of course, I want to thank you, our attendees and guests, for your comments and contributions, especially in the chat function today. Really great to pick your brains and get your insight too as leaders in this space. Do look out for correspondence from CyberSmart directly on how to follow up with these vital discussions, as well as to gain access to the newsletter, podcast, and other upcoming really helpful content, as well as, folks, to grab that £15 delivery voucher. Not a scam, I promise, just a really nice gesture. Don't forget, you'll be able to take a deeper dive into these themes in the follow-up webinar that CyberSmart is hosting with the DSIT, that's Gemma Robson's team there, on the 11th of May. But until then, stay safe. The last hurdle. Stay safe, everyone. Best of luck with your business endeavors in the new year. And we hope to see you back here at the next virtual showcase very soon indeed. Goodbye.